start with verse 1 with our explanation, and it says, the first part, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Now the time when judges ruled, this was a period when the people of Israel was supposed to be living under the covenant that they had made with God to abandon their idols and their apostasy and just go forth following the Lord. But they kept getting into like a generational cycle of sinning, worshiping idols, being punished, crying out to the Lord for help, the Lord rescuing them by sending a judge to bring them back to God. The people obeying for a while and then falling back into their trap and starting all over again. And here we see that this was a time when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. So it looks like since there was a famine in the land, they were in the time period of their cycle where they were sinning and crying out for help and waiting on the Lord to rescue them. So a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn into the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Judah, one of the tribes of Israel was Judah, and then it was Bethlehem. Now this man was going to leave Bethlehem and go to the foreign country, Moab. He was going to stay there at least maybe until the famine passed in his land so that he can keep his family alive and survive and they wouldn't starve. Now, ironically, Bethlehem, the name of it means house of bread. And bread is a general term for food and plentiful food and just overwhelming supply. But they were in a famine, and he decided to take his family southeast. Moab was southeast of the Dead Sea, so they were going to have to kind of go around the Dead Sea to get to Moab. It was quite a journey. And it's ironic that they decided to go to Moab because Moab was a nation that oppressed Israel during the time of Judges. It was one of the first nations when the Lord punished them in many different ways. Sometimes it would be famine, sometimes it would be takeover from some of the surrounding nations. So it looks like at this time they were going through a famine. Now they decided to go to Moab. Now this was one of the places that had originally oppressed the people of Israel. And he decided to go there because you know, the famine must have really been pretty bad. And you can imagine there still may have been some tension involved with the people of Moab and the people of Israel. But he decided to go there anyway. So verse 2, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. So Elimelech was the head of the family. His wife was Naomi, and they had 2 sons. And they were called Ephrathites because Ephrath was an earlier name for Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is the place where they were coming from. So you were generally called the Ephrathites, the name of the place where you were from, which was Ephrath. And he decided to take his family on, and they decided to go ahead and set up camp there in Moab. Now in verse 3, we see that Elimelech, it says, and Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And you can imagine what Naomi was going through. First, she had to, you know, deal with the famine in her land. She was being punished with her people for the sin that her people were offending God with. And then, after dealing with the famine, she had to be uprooted. The head of the house decided to take them all away from their native and go to this foreign land where they had been oppressed by before. So she had to uproot from her homeland, leave her family, the people that she's known, and then the head of her family died. Back in those days, the head of the household pretty much provided everything that the family needs. The women were generally the home keepers, and the men provided. So it seemed like everything just kept going wrong in her life, left and right. So in verse 4, we see that they still stayed in Moab, and her sons decided to marry.
Thank you.
And verse 4 says, and they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. Now in verse 4, we can kind of, we know that there was tension in Moab, but there's also a little more about Moab. Back then, friendly relationships with that nation was discouraged and probably even forbidden. If I can get someone to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 23, that would be great. And while you're turning, I'm going to turn there as well. Once you get there, I'll let you know which verse. I'm going to have somebody read. So Deuteronomy chapter 23. And it'll be verses 3 through 6 that I want someone to read for me. One moment. Okay, yeah, so Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 through 6. If someone could read that for me in a good, loud, strong voice.
An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Because they met you not with bread and with water in the way, when ye came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor, or Pethor, or Mesopotamia, to curse thee. Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity all the days forever.
Amen. So the Lord was letting the people of Israel know at this time that He wasn't really fond right then of the Moabites to go and just allow them to worship in their temple and to really fellowship with them. Because in Numbers you would see that the Moabites, the king of Moab decided to listen to his people's fear and response to what they did to the, was it the Amorites or the Amalekites? One of the Ahites. One of the Ahites. The people were trying to get through when they were being on their exodus from Egypt. They were going to pass through the land, and the people weren't. It was it was a vast number of people, and they didn't want them trekking through their land and messing up their stuff. So they decided to kind of stop them, and the Lord wasn't having that, and the Lord allowed them to put a good smashing on those people. And then the people of Moab saw them coming through, and they got fearful, but they were like, we're not going to do anything. We just want to get through to get to where we're going. And the people were fearful because they had just saw what they had done to the other people. And they went to their king and they said, don't allow this to happen. So the king hired someone to try to put a curse on the people of Israel to stop them from getting through. And the Lord was displeased with that. The Lord had a call for his people, and he didn't want anyone getting in the way of that. So he put that that guideline in place where he didn't really want them fellowshipping like that. But they had already moved there. They took on women as wives. And then verse 5, we can see, and Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them. And the woman was left of her, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. So now Naomi's despair just continued. Not only did she have to go through the famine, get uprooted from her home, the head of her family died, now her sons died as well. Right. And generally back then, even if your husband died and you at least had sons, you still kind of had someone to take care of you. Right. You didn't have to worry about being just poor and just left alone because you didn't really have an income or a source of supply for your needs. But here we see that her sons died as well. So now we have these 3 women and no one to head them. And back then, God had a law set in place for his widows where he wanted the next closest relative in their family to take care of them. But at this time, they're in Moab, and they didn't have anyone. And she didn't have any sons who could go on and marry the girls then and then, provide more family. And if she were to wait to get married and then provide women for those girls, it would have been a long time. But at that age, she really wasn't, she was starting to lose hope, I would say.
Yes.
So, and also, in those times, it was almost nothing worse than being a widow. They were generally taken advantage of or ignored, and that's why God had that law set in place where even, I'm not going to jump in this Dorian side of it, God had that law set in place. He had that law set in place to protect his people.